on one part of the world in a calculation resulted in a big change on the other parts of the world. So, and it was equated to a butterfly flapping its wings on one side of the earth and creating a hurricane on the other side, the butterfly effect. And so how does that translate into our lives? It means that the very small things that we classify as small things somehow create big outcomes. And now we think about the world and we think, oh, but there's all these bigger things. Now take a universal view of this. There's nothing in this world that's big at all from a universal perspective. Nothing. I don't care what it is. I don't care who it is. I don't care what it is. It's all small stuff, period. It is. It really is. But it isn't to you individually, and it isn't to the creation at all. Just, it's kind of this weirdness. On one hand, it doesn't matter. On the other hand, it totally matters. Because within this, you're still that hologram. You're still the whole of creation within you, so it matters. It's kind of like your creation is your baby, all right? It's the metaphor of creation, creating the image and likeness of God. He has his babies, that's all of us and everything else. And then we have ours within the creation that we do as individuals. But most of us do it with only the storage system of experience operating and the disconnects that cut us off from communication here. The knowledge of good and evil, I would say, was the big one, because here it is. What keeps you from doing something? What keeps you depressed is you and your choices about you and how you feel about it. And so again, it's like we've been lied to and told we're powerless by every institution out there, that we have to have groupthink, we have to stand in the little box, we have to do what we're told. Yeah, there's order, there's respect. I've talked about all that. But it was to be there in the essence of liberty and freedom, not with a bunch of regulations and rules that make it impossible to function. You don't even know what the rules are, and they tell you you have to, and it covers 3 floors of a library, and that's called the law library. 3 floors of a big building, and you're supposed to know all that? That's not justice. That's not living free. That's a shackle of rules that's way too big for the common man and common sense. But we've built it, and there's reasons. We'll get into that. We'll get into how to reassemble it. I also want to talk to you about the power of the small in this. The widow's mite, which was a gift given given as a gift. Small gift worth a penny. And then, oh, that's nothing. Oh no, the bigger gift was the widow's mite, not the wealthy man's deal. And the deal was, it takes more for a wealthy man to get to heaven than a camel to get through the eye of a needle, is the way that statement went. And what does that really mean? It means the more complicated your life is the way I see it, and the more stuff you have in the way in the material, the less opportunity is to see the spiritual. And I think that's true. I think the simpler things are, the easier it is to see what's important. The further you get away from all of what man creates, like everything you see in this room except for the plants and the living people, when you get closer to what is really created in God's outpouring, it does anchor you and reconnect you. And something that we need to do more of. And we used to all be this way. Most of us were agricultural peoples a little over 100 years ago. People were in the earth, touching the earth, connected to things, not lost in cities with no connection whatsoever. So how can you possibly be a steward of a planet you can't even touch anymore? So it's rethinking sort of how we've done this, maybe looking a little differently. And I don't think we're doing this correctly either out of shortage. I think we should be functioning out of abundance, and we'll talk a lot about that as we go on. The ego is tricky. Each of us has an ego equal to our awareness. It's just as smart as you are to keep you running in fear and anger and all that stuff. And a quick way to see it is, if it's emotional and it's dragging you somewhere, definitely stop, pay attention, even if it's love, even if it's empathy, because it can take you places too. It can take you places too. Make sure the emotions, remember that's the energy that fuels your thought. That is the ingredients that create reality. So don't spend your empathy in a way that doesn't change something. You take those emotions now and you form them with thought to go create something. Don't wallow in empathy and grief or whatever that might turn into. That's not empathy anymore. So pay close attention to what you're doing with the emotions. Don't let the emotions be the experience. They're only half. The other half's the thought that goes with them. It works both ways. Thoughts without emotions, pretty powerless. Emotions without thoughts, they don't go anywhere. You need the two ingredients. This is part of the big lie. Why women are always emotional and men are always intellectual. It's because of the shaping that happened early. It's not how we started. We had balanced brains as young children. We lost them as we gained education. And then we got typeset into performing a half a function. So we weren't functioning properly. And then we form unions where you're trying to create a full function out of a union, when you should have two fully functional humans coming into union, so you get the maximum things that come from union. And that's where we're going to be heading in the next sections. You know, when you talk about listening and thinking about what you're hearing, you can hear a lot through the head, and that's intellectual thinking, you know, as we think about it. And then you can feel a lot through the heart, which we think is just feeling and somehow isn't connected to the brain. These two things go together. They're hemispheres. We're going to talk about the brain. We're going to break that down today and talk about that. But the last couple of things I want to mention as we kind of move out of the self and into other relationships is the idea that once you're fully informed on who you are and you've decided what you really truly believe and where you have deficits, where you want to learn, where you've decided to apply yourself to learn, to fulfill your curiosity. And then you begin to construct a life, and we're going to talk about ways to do that. And we're going to get into all the other issues I've covered in the past. We're going to get into the alternative energy, we're going to get into the HAARP stuff, weather modification, all of those things, government. But we're starting to give you your power back, because nothing's going to change in this world until individuals have their power back. We spent the entire morning give you a context of how I found mine and how you can find yours. And in the context of what, in my region of the world, I come from a powerful family, and I can say that. And that's not about ego, that's about reality on the ground. And my family is conservative as hell on one side and as liberal as hell on the other, you know, on both extremes in this state. And we get things done. Because one thing is for sure, we respect each other and we respect the baseline values that make us uniquely different. When we get together at Christmas, it's a debate like you've never seen. But at the end of the day, it's love like you've never seen. Coming out of that same room in those same hours. That's the power that built this nation. That's the power that builds individuals. And that's what made life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness possible. When we get back from this short break, we're going to talk about relationships. We're going to talk about love. We're going to move from that into the metaphor of enlightenment, if you will. Then we're going to talk about children. We're going to talk about the educational model that's failing us. And I'm going to present an alternative model for education that every parent listening needs to hear. And everybody paying taxes for education, which is everybody else, needs to hear. We're all being ripped off with education right now, not just public, but private too. And that can change. People need knowledge. Knowledge is power, and power, the kind of power that leads to wisdom. By the grace of God, we need a better system, because what we've got now is failing. So individuals to be powerful, it's all about the things we're going to cover today. But then we're going to talk about our government. We're going to talk about the institutions that we've trusted and how to rebuild those institutions so by the people, of the people, and for the people is real again. We'll be right back. 1, 2, is the audio up?
Yep. Give me a count to 10.
Just give me a 3 count.
3, 2, 1.
And welcome back. You know, this next section I'm going to get into love and relationships a little bit. You know, when I think about this whole area, you know, when I did some recent broadcasts where I talked a bit about this, and I got a really strong reaction, primarily from men actually, and I appreciate that. And I got over 500 responses. I answered all of them. I still have, there's still 100 more that have come in since I haven't gotten to. But this is what I kept hearing, was just a lot of us are just uncomfortable with ourselves, and that's what I kept hearing. And you know, and men overcompensate. We do it in lots of different ways, and women overcompensate for what the culture tells them they're supposed to be too. And you know, if you really want to think about how women are abused, I'll tell you one of the most abusive things. Think how much it costs to dress as a woman. Just a simple thing. Now, all those designers of all that stuff, they know that. They charge you 5 times what any man will pay for that same pair of shoes or that same shirt, and they get away with it because the culture lets them. You know, your money gets spent in ways that doesn't have to be, because people make decisions because they know that they can take advantage of you because of the importance of your outer appearance, your shell, your carrier is to you, because how people have made that so important that you run around fearful that someone's going to reject you because you don't look right. And a man because he doesn't provide right or doesn't have a big enough truck or a big enough house or whatever it is. And you know, when you start to think about how we build relationships when we're always worrying about our budgets and our finances, they're built on a different kind of foundation. In fact, it came up on radio recently. I didn't even put the two together, but I'd mentioned I studied gemology as a child, and diamonds were discovered in Africa in the 1800s, and they were pretty rare. They were primarily only from India and a few other places, and then they found these deposits, but there was so much found that they couldn't let it just go out or they'd be worthless, or worth a lot less, I should say. So they formed the De Beers cartel, and then that became Cecil Rhodes's dream, and if you remember, he created the Rhodes Scholars. And diamonds weren't a big deal. They decided that diamonds would sanctify every engagement with the engagement ring, and that got invented as a way to create demand for diamonds. So they would be demanded by every couple that wanted to support the De Beers cartel, which up until recently was just every diamond you bought. And so when you think about it, do you believe in Cecil Rhodes and his philosophy of life and the bankers that run the world? Because you've been paying for it if you bought a diamond engagement ring before about 15 years ago. Because that's when the Russian, and they were part of the cartel too, but they went a little bit independent, and then they found diamonds in Australia and they found them in Canada, and that changed everything. But even as the basis of a marriage, it's based on a rock, right? A piece of carbon, and actually the carbon has a lot of other applications. It's kind of funny, maybe we'll talk about them later. But the bonding of relationship, the forming of a bond of relationship in the form of marriage, as an example. There's a lot of debate in the world right now about the government, which marriages ought to be recognized and which ones aren't. I don't think the government should be involved in marriage at all, with anybody's marriage, actually. Because I think that's a religious sacrament for most people. For others, it might be a license, like getting a business license, but if that's what you need is a business license, we have plenty of business law. You can do a partnership agreement and do that. You don't need anything special for that. Why is the government involved in religious sacraments? That's what I want to know. They shouldn't be. Now, where they should be involved is when two people have children that are minor children, that are innocents. Yeah, we need some rules about how that might work if, you know, I mean, there's innocent people involved. But that should be able to be worked out. I think there's plenty of law that protects children. I got a suggestion, though, that a lot of people get really freaked out about, but I think it's one of the keys for relationships to be successful, could be a very good key. How about this? If you're going to get married, How about at the same time you got married, you were required to negotiate your divorce? Now, let me say that again, okay? At the same time you get married, that you can't get married. They say, no, you can't get married till we see what your divorce agreement looks like. Well, we're not going to have kids. That's okay. You got to plan on it in case something happens. Oh, well, we didn't plan on doing this. No, you have to have every contingency just like, like the world is. And you make a plan. If I'm going to have kids, this is what's going to happen. If I'm going to have wealth, this is what's going to happen. If I'm going to have nothing, this is what's going to happen. But you lay it all out while you're in love. You see, whether it's fair and honest and true. Then lay out your divorce decree, and you've done a couple things. One, you might want to avoid it. Later on, you might want to try and work things out because you know how it ends. Two, you decongest the courts in this country by half. Half of the litigation has to do with divorces, just freed up a lot to take care of other law. And maybe you've set a framework that maybe you don't get married in the first place because you can't agree on what it might look like in the last place. And then that might save you a whole lot of time and effort and divorce lawyers. So again, who should be involved in your relationship? It ought to be you and the other party. The government's role should be minimized, not maximized. And why they belong in our marriages, I don't know. I still can't quite sort that out. There was a time, I guess, when diseases there were blood tests involved with syphilis and so on, but those days are over, at least in most countries, in terms of being required before you get married. I don't remember that being done here in quite a long time. So relationships are about, first, your relationship to yourself, that we covered in the last sections, because you got to have a good one. And you have to love yourself. And a lot of men have trouble with that. A lot of women do too. And it has to do with our self-image that is derived mainly from this carrier or shell, which has, it's a reflection, but that's all. It's like a snapshot, if you will, a picture in time of your expression at that moment. But that doesn't mean you're stuck. My body changed a lot. I mean, people tell you, it's like, I lost a little too quick, but that's just the way it went. But your body will change. I have someone that works on me regularly, does physical work on me, a rolfer, which is an interesting type of physical muscular rearrangement, because they put your muscle structure sort of back around your bones so it holds everything in place more efficiently. And my posture was going a bit, and some of my muscle groups were not where they needed to be. So I do this every once in a while. And the way it works is you also store in your body emotional energy. A lot of people don't know this. And when a rolfer works on you, if they do it right, oftentimes things will get released in you emotionally. You'll cry, or you'll be really happy, or things happen, and it's kind of strange a little bit. But also what happens is the muscle groups get reordered. And then what I did in between my visits, 'cause I see her every 10 days the last couple of months, and I've been doing my spiritual work, my prayer work, and it's been reorganizing inside out. And it's kind of funny, I'll go back and see her every 10 days, and she sees a physical change that she had nothing to do with each time. And it has to do with the things that we'll be covering a bit today. But again, it does. Energy in changes form is what I conclude clearly from what I've been experiencing and what I've been doing the last 50 years in terms of scholarship and where I am now. And I say this too, is the work you want to read that someone does, read the stuff they wrote at the end of their lives, not the stuff they wrote at the beginning. Because at the end of their life is sort of where they may have rejected everything they did in the beginning and completely reformed it. And this is where the real knowledge is. It's in that period of reflection when everything becomes an entirely different ballgame in terms of how we look at the world, how we think about things as we reflect on our lives more completely, going back, sort of back over our lives. So here I am, 50 years later, thinking about my relationships, all of them, because I've always valued my relationships as the most important thing. And so I've always spent a lot of time, and my relationships has varied a lot. I mean, as I mentioned, I have 6 children. I've had 3 primary relationships in my life. My first wife, Star, I see her from time to time at the holiday seasons with my kids. We're not mad at each other. There's no anger there at all. But we're very different people for sure, and we both know that. My second wife, Sheila, just recently, in the last month or so, after 10 years of divorce, do I think we finally have a reasonable relationship again. And I'm glad of that. I'm really thankful for that, because you don't throw away 26 years, you know, and of experience. I certainly don't. Yeah, there were a lot of happy and unhappy times in every year, I'm sure, but as I look back on all of that, I wouldn't change a breath I've taken in this lifetime, even the most miserable ones, because all of those things allowed me to see things differently, to feel things differently, and reflect differently in the world, and that was always worth doing. So the relationships for me was always primary, whether they were my friends or relatives or what have you. And this is something else I'll say. I know a lot of people have talked to me because they learned different aspects of my family configuration. And I'd mentioned on the air a few months ago that 2 of my daughters haven't spoken to me in 10 years. And people go, how could that happen? Well, things happen. Families are complicated. That'll change. Things will change, I'm sure, as time goes on. But the point is, a lot of our relationships, I had a man working with me here at the house. I needed an extra hand when I was doing certain work, and he had the same experience, and he didn't know that I had, and it had totally broken him. He had been homeless, he'd been alcoholic, he was just coming out of homelessness, and it was over that. And then he found out that he had 1 kid that didn't talk to him, I had 2 that weren't talking to me. He couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe that I didn't let it destroy me. But it helped him a lot, because he's a different man from all of that. And yeah, he'll struggle, he'll fall, and he'll rise himself back up again, but he'll never be the same, because he knows that there's someone else that suffered the same way he did and made it, and he knows he can make it too. And a lot of my experience, people say, oh, you shouldn't say that, you shouldn't say that. I'm going to tell you, as a public person, you don't have privacy. If you think you do, then you better get out of public life, because you don't. And unless you're ready to stand before the public with everything you've ever done and face it, then don't do it, because that's what's required. You have to give up your personal privacy so everyone else can have theirs. That's the price. My family's been in it 3 generations. We know the price. You know, when I think about public service, I gave up my dad to public service because he wasn't around to do the things most of you experienced if you had a dad that was around. But I didn't resent that. Although I didn't have to participate in it, because my mom and dad never insisted on that, what I did get to do is decide and to learn from that and to get that experience without having to be immersed in it as some kind of requirement. But when you got the same name as your dad and he's done all that, it set something up in you. And then I cursed my oldest son with the same name, and he did the same with his son. And I say that in a laughing kind of way, because it's a standard that we have to rise into, or not. And but how we choose to live it doesn't have to be through politics. It can be in any number of ways. And so that multi-generational knowledge is extraordinarily valuable, and I think it's one of the things that we don't necessarily convey. But having said that about families, oftentimes our friends turn into the closer relationships than family members. I can say that's been true in much of my life. My closest friends are closer to me than any of my family members, with the exclusion of perhaps my mother. But my brothers and sisters, who largely lived in Anchorage most of our lives, or close to each other most of our lives, no, my friends have deeper relationships. Now, I have deep relationships with all of my siblings at all kinds of levels, but day to day, this is how most of us live. Our children move on, they create their own lives, their own networks of people, and our tie to blood relation oftentimes is distorted. And so we attach a lot of need to fulfill the other person's life, like our children. You know, their failings, we make ours. Their successes, we make ours. None of them are ours. Failures or successes, they're theirs. The only thing you get to do is provide an environment for a little while and try and help them see who they are for a little while, and then hope to God that they can see it too. And that's the real challenge. was to give people confidence in who they are, because that's stripped away every step. When I think about relationships in forming unions with all others, you know, how do you do that? That baseline of respect again comes into play. When you look around the world right now, look in our own country, look at the news. It's all designed to create anger, because anger in today's world sells. Fear sells. Look at every commercial. You either smell bad, you got bad breath, something's leaking out of your body wrong, you need a diaper. Whatever it is that makes you fearful, right? Whatever makes you feel uncomfortable about this shell, because they want you to think that's all you are, is that shell. And you're not. It's like the wrapper. It's like so not you. It's so not. And this is the mistakes that we've made, and it affects our self-value, the way we reflect on each other, and how we project in the world. And it's not about position either. And this is what people don't realize is the smallest things can create big outcomes. The butterfly effect I was talking about, let me give you a little simple example. I use it often. It's the guy walking down the street example who smiles at the person passing him. Just for that instant, makes a connection. Hey, how are you this morning? Man, it's good to be alive. That kind of expression of hello. And that person might have been so bummed out they were just thinking about blowing their brains out and they were on their way to do it. But that one moment, that one breath of humanity they felt, they went the other way. And they didn't do it. And then that person went off and cured cancer, let's say. Who did that? The person that made the smile that kept that person from blowing their brains out, or the person that did the work of curing cancer? I would say the smile, because nothing would have happened without it. Don't underestimate one thing about who you are. Just do it. Be it. Express who you are completely as you can in a way of always lifting. And I'll talk more about that as we go on too. But again, going back to relationships with others, here's what I would say about that in terms of bloodlines and friends. The highest form of love, the very highest, and I got this from one of my wild friends, Richard. The highest form of love is friendship. I'll say it again. Highest form of love in the world is real, true friendship. You know, your friends when you're down, they're not going to beat you up. They're going to nurture you. Your friends when you're down aren't going to point out all the problems you have and all how lousy you are. If they are, they're probably not your friends. You just haven't figured it out yet. But the point of the matter is, friends generally are there no matter, they know all your flaws. They know how screwed up you are because they were screwed up with you if you had them for any length of time. And good people, I can tell you this, really good people all have old friends, unless they've all died of old age. Think about it. Good people tend to keep their friends for a lifetime unless they've died. It tells you a lot. Don't meet old people with no old friends unless they're all dead of old age, because you don't want to be their new friend, or you'll have the same disappointments all the other friends they don't have had. And when you think about friendships and relationships, they take time. They got to invest time in those. And if you're too busy chasing dollars and you think that's what life is, you'll never take the time. And that's sad, because you look at your children, you look at your households, you look at your friendships, you look at all of it, and did you take the time? And this is where I think, again, we need to slow it down. We need to recognize some things about human beings that are different. We don't need to run 110%. That's dumb. That's really dumb. We should run at 90% most of the time. And the reason I say that is 10% you ought to reserve for yourself. Tithe to your own temple, your body. Give yourself 10%, and your family, your immediate core. Give them 10%. And then you'll always have an energy when you need more. It'll be there. The other thing you'll do is you won't burn off the last 10 years of your life. Now think about this. If you run at 110%, you ain't going to live as long. And you're not going to get nearly as much done as you thought. Because here's what happens. This is observation of my eldest son, Nicholas, is compound interest. We know how it works. If you just leave it in there, it just keeps growing and growing. Well, experience is the same way. The compound interest of experience is time in. The longer you go, the more valuable that experience becomes, because at a certain point, mine, after 50 years today, is resetting. I go, okay, on the platform of this knowing, I'm ready to do something very different with what I'm going to teach in the future and what I think is important. But here we are as people, always facing that same choice, individually or collectively, about how we spend our time, how we invest our time in ourselves first, and then in our families and our friends. And you better save some or you won't have any to invest. You'll be too busy chasing dollars and things that at the end of life aren't going to matter at all. And we'll get to that when I talk about my friend Amy, who's been a hospice nurse most of her life, and she's really good at it. I mean, she's really good at it. She's gifted at it. Dealing with people, families who are dealing with a dying person, the health professionals are dying person is there, and the dying person. And she's an angel of help and wisdom. And she's, I just proofed her book for all the people in that configuration. It's going to be good. It's going to help millions of people. I know it will. Because the one thing that she always knows in that last few weeks as people are kind of fading in and out of where they're going and where they are, none of them think about one more day at the office. None of them think about one more thing they should have bought at Macy's, if there even is a Macy's anymore. What they think about is their family and their friends and their relationships and things they need to fix, and they don't want it to be too late. They want to get it done then. Don't wait till then. Reset now your priorities for people ahead of things, for human beings ahead of stuff. Take your time back. Reduce the demands on things and get your time back, because money only equates to time. If you have a little bit of money, you might buy yourself some time in terms of being free of having to make some. If you live a lifestyle that supports living, not just buying a bunch of junk. And the system works to do that. And we'll get into that as we get into this later. I want to talk about death and transformation. I've talked a bit about. I've lost 50 friends in the last 10 years. 50. People I related to a lot, because most of my friends, as I said, are a lot older than I am, because I started a lot younger and I sought out older people for knowledge because they knew something I didn't. Experience gives you that. What I also learned in dealing with a lot of people is transparency. That's hard. You know, with your friends, you're pretty transparent because they see you in your worst. Your spouse probably too. Although that can really grind a person too. Happens a lot in relationships. They come together, they're opposites in so many ways, and they begin to, like rocks grinding on each other till you get a smooth surface. Everyone at least half of them quit before they get there. But again, it's about honing the person. If you're prepared as a human being to enter into a union with someone else, chances are the tension will be less, especially if both of you have prepared as individuals. No one's really preparing us to be equipped individuals or just preparing us to be consumers, taxpayers, or some other form of slave. What I'm trying to do in this feed is return you to yourself and then build out from there. The inner work that you have to do, your own naked hours, your own levels of commitment are all your own. The thing I found at 52 that I didn't know, now this is 10 years ago. I thought everybody did this, and I found out they didn't. And it just stunned me when I found out. And I mean, it hurt me. I mean, I was crying about it, actually literally in tears, because I couldn't imagine this. Is that when I look in someone's eyes, I always see the same thing. I look right in, I see the full potential of a human being, that human being, not some other, that person. And I begin to relate to that. I begin to work with that. I begin to pull that right out of a person. Anyone who's worked for me knows that I do that. One of the cameramen here worked for me a long time ago, 20 years ago as a Forester. He knows, he's watched me do that. Walk right in, not see any flaws, and pull the best out of people in ways that very few can. Because but I thought everybody was doing that. You know, it's like breathing in Beijing again. You know, everybody's doing this. No, at 52 years old, 10 years ago, I find out, oh no, most people don't even see that. I mean, they don't even see that. They can't look in a person's eyes and see that deeper essence that's there and not even notice it. And it hurt me because I could not have made it. I could not have lived that 52 years without that level of connection with at least a few people. And I had it, at least on my side, with everyone. But that was a very strange feeling, to recognize that that was not the normal. And then I thought about it quite a bit, and that's where we're going to get into some of this, because there's some ways for all of us to find that spot. That's easy. That's an easy exercise. I'll teach it to you. But the thing that I also saw in relationships is this issue of lift and drag, what people call positive and negative. I don't want to use that because it gets overused. Lift and drag, because what we're doing is we're either lifting each other up or we're dragging each other down. So I want us to think about the negative emotions as a drag on your life and the other as a lift on your life. So if it's love, it's empathy, compassion, we're lifting. If it's anger, hatred, guilt, you're dragging. So they need to be dealt with, not ignored, but in the way that I was mentioning earlier. Pay attention to them, take control of them, go deep into yourself to figure out what's going on there, and then work on it. Don't mask it with drugs like the psychological industry will tell you to do. Just don't worry about it. Just take a pill and change the chemistry so you won't think and feel that way anymore. What? Turn your humanity off so you don't think and feel what? Is that what we're doing? Is that what we're doing with the chemical industry to feed our bodies this, to turn our brains off, rather than get in there and do the work? How about doing the work of understanding most psychosis comes from the part that we call